I heard fast approaching steps, followed by a sharp, commanding voice that shattered the quiet. She stood there, her emerald dress gleaming in the sun, pointing straight at my truck like she'd just uncovered some major offense. That's when it hit me. This wasn't going to be a casual encounter. She didn't greet me, didn't explain. Just started barking out commands like she ran the whole damn neighborhood. Her smug evaluations, the bold markings in red ink scrawled across my vehicle. It wasn't just a flex, it was a warning shot, and I realized then, she had no idea who she'd just tangled with. She had unknowingly started a game she wouldn't be able to control, and I was about to end it on my terms. I'm Jake Thompson, 47 years old. Used to be a Texas state trooper. Nothing fancy about me, just a man who prefers the simple things. Faded denim shirts, dusty old jeans, and my well-worn cowboy hat. These days, I keep to myself on a quiet ranch, fixing fences, caring for my cattle, and savoring the peace I worked hard to earn. Then came Karen Mitchell. She's 38, rolled in from Dallas about half a year ago, always picture perfect, with platinum blonde hair that somehow never moves, and a closet full of bright, flashy outfits that look more fit for brunch at a resort than real life out here in the sticks. From the very first moment, she made her intentions loud and clear. She'd crowned herself the president of the HOA. But what Karen didn't yet understand was this. The neighborhood she claimed to be managing, it was actually carved out from my own ranch land just 3 years ago. It all kicked off with a bright pink notice slapped onto my front door while I was out tending to the cattle. By the time I returned that evening, the garish piece of paper danced in the warm Texas breeze like a flag waving surrender. Notice of infraction. Pickup truck placement violates the aesthetic regulations of the community. That's what it said, printed in bold letters that looked like they'd come off her personal inkjet printer. The warning referred to something called Section 4.2 of the Community Guidelines Handbook, and warned of increasingly severe consequences if I didn't fix the issue within 72 hours. I read it twice, laughed at the ridiculousness of it all, and tossed it straight into the trash. My 2018 Ford F-150 was sitting in my own driveway, at least 200 yards away from the nearest neighbor's house. But in Karen's eyes, it was parked in her kingdom. Something told me this wasn't a one-time warning. This was just her opening chess move in a battle she intended to win. A few days later, while I was swapping out a broken fence post, I noticed her striding toward the edge of my property. She had a clipboard in one hand, a measuring tape dangling from the other, and a big sign tucked under her arm that screamed, HOA Regulations, in thick, red lettering. She wore a lemon-yellow sundress and strutted around like she belonged here. To me, she looked like a songbird flapping around in eagle country. For the next 20 minutes, she meticulously paced, snapped pictures, took measurements, and scribbled notes like she was cataloging evidence at a crime scene. Then she marched right up to my front steps with the air of someone used to having doors opened for her. She knocked like she held the deed to the place. "Mr. Thompson," she began curtly, "your truck is exactly 2 3/4 inches beyond the permitted boundary, per the neighborhood compliance policy." I replied evenly, "Ma'am, I'm not part of any HOA." She shook her head slowly, flashing a smug smile. "I'm afraid that's not how this works, sir," she replied, with an overly polite tone that dripped with superiority. "Every home within a 500-yard radius falls under the jurisdiction of the Oak Hollow Owners Association, and as the elected president, I am simply enforcing the rules." I held back the obvious question, who exactly elected her? But I kept my mouth shut for now. With over 15 years spent in law enforcement, many of those as a detective, I knew better than to argue. What I needed was proof, and I was about to start collecting it. I spent the entire weekend setting up security cameras across my land. I positioned them to cover every approach, the driveway, the edges of the property, and all main access points to the house. If Karen planned on causing more trouble, I intended to have every bit of it on video, and within just a few days, she gave me plenty of reasons to be cautious. She plastered a dozen violation slips on my truck and front door, each one more ridiculous than the last. One accused me of allowing unapproved livestock exposure because my cattle were visible from the street. Another claimed my fencing exceeded height restrictions, despite being standard for a working ranch. But my personal favorite? Overuse of patriotic imagery, all because of the modest American flag attached to my mailbox. Karen didn't let up. 3 separate times she crossed onto my land to measure the property, uninvited, waving her infamous clipboard and trusty yellow measuring tape around like a badge of honor. But the worst wasn't what she did in plain sight. It was what she did behind closed doors. She began quietly poisoning the neighborhood against me, spreading lies, telling anyone who'd listen that I was a disruptive presence who refused to follow the rules, that I was the reason their property values were going down, that I was a threat to their peaceful way of life. The more she tightened her grip, the more I realized I couldn't back down. If I let her win, she'd only grow bolder. Then came the next escalation. She hired a legal document service to issue a formal warning, bold letters stamped across the top. Final notice, mandatory compliance required. The letter accused me of multiple infractions. It ordered me to relocate my truck, take down the so-called non-conforming fence, and cough up 6 months' worth of unpaid HOA dues, totaling $800. But one look at that letter, and I could tell, it was more bluster than law. Somebody with dreams of authority, but no real legal grounding, had clearly written it. That evening, I pulled out my old property records. I spread them across the kitchen table, combing through line by line, and there it was, something I had completely overlooked, a perpetual easement clause, baked into the original deed. It gave me unrestricted, permanent access to the exact same driveway Karen was trying to regulate. Not only was I in full compliance, I had legal rights on my side, rights that had been in place since 1897 when the original land grant was issued. That discovery changed everything. Now I had the law to back me up, and Karen had no idea, but she wasn't done. She escalated things yet again, moving into what could only be described as psychological warfare. She hired a private security team, 2 guys in a beat-up sedan, who parked at the end of my driveway for hours, jotting notes, snapping photos, and watching my every move like I was some sort of suspect under surveillance. She even phoned the city's building department, falsely reporting that I was illegally altering my fence, claiming I was ruining the community's appearance without permits. But the boldest stunt yet, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting, its sole purpose to address what she called the Jake Thompson situation. From my kitchen window, I watched her go door to door, stirring up drama with neighbors who barely knew me. She wore yet another yellow dress and pranced around like a twisted butterfly, spreading discord instead of nectar. It was becoming undeniable. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was on a mission to dominate every inch of this place, and I was directly in her line of fire. Then came day 15. I walked outside that morning to find she had taken things from petty to criminal. During the night, someone had sprayed the words "trespassing vehicle" in bright red paint across both sides of my truck. It looked like a modern-day scarlet letter. The paint was still fresh when I saw it, which meant she had just been here. She had struck during the early morning hours like some wannabe stealth agent of suburban chaos. But even that wasn't the end of it. Karen had also contacted a local towing service and somehow persuaded them to remove my truck from my own driveway. She told them the vehicle was a code violation and that she had the legal power to authorize its impoundment. The driver, a seasoned guy named Earl, stepped out of the tow truck and took one look at the situation before shaking his head. He apologized immediately, clearly realizing something didn't add up. She said it was abandoned on community land, he explained. Told us to come quick and bring cash. Wouldn't even give a full name. Karen had crossed a serious line now. This wasn't just overreach anymore. This was fraud. What she didn't understand was that she'd just made her biggest mistake, and she picked the wrong man to try it on. I've spent 25 years in law enforcement, and if I learned one thing, it's that you don't stop bullies by yelling. You stop them with documentation, solid proof, and the proper legal channels. While she was out playing queen of the cul-de-sac with her spray paint and imaginary rules, I was methodically preparing a case that would be airtight in any Texas courtroom. The first step in any proper investigation is understanding your opponent, and it was time I got very familiar with the self-proclaimed HOA president, Mrs. Karen Mitchell. That night I sat down at my dining room table and went through every scrap of paper related to the sale of my land. Records, contracts, property maps, everything. I laid it all out like I was back on the force solving a major case. What I found was pure gold, Karen's entire HOA claim, a complete fabrication. According to Texas Property Code Section 209.004, the creation of a legitimate homeowners association requires written approval from at least 75% of the residents, along with official registration with the Texas Comptroller's Office. Karen had neither. She'd only secured 3 signatures out of the 23 homes in the subdivision. Not a single official form had been filed. Her so-called HOA had the legal weight of monopoly money. The next morning, I got an unexpected visitor. Tom Mitchell, Karen's husband, was standing on my porch holding a plate of cookies and wearing the face of a man who hadn't had a peaceful morning in years. Tom was a quiet man, the kind who looked like he spent most of his marriage saying "I'm sorry" on his wife's behalf. He hesitated before finally speaking. "Jake, I need to apologize for Karen," he said, shifting his weight nervously. She likes things a certain way, but she doesn't always understand when she's crossed a line." Then he let something slip that made my ears perk up. Turns out, this wasn't Karen's first time trying to run a fake HOA. She had pulled the same act twice before, once in a Dallas suburb, and again in a planned community outside Houston. Both times, her schemes unraveled when the neighbors caught on, and both times she and Tom packed up and moved before things got ugly. "I keep hoping she'll change," Tom added softly, "but maybe this is just who she is." Fortunately, retirement came with benefits, including a network of legal experts who respected my service and were more than willing to return past favors. I reached out to Sarah Williams, a tough-as-nails real estate attorney I had worked with on multiple occasions back in my detective days. Sarah had helped me resolve boundary disputes, land contracts, and everything in between, and she owed me for some key courtroom testimony I'd provided years ago. I emailed her the documents and explained the situation. It didn't take long before I had her on the phone. "Jake," she said, her voice sharp and angry, "this woman has absolutely no legal right to do anything she's claiming. This is harassment, plain and simple. She's also guilty of vandalism, impersonation, and potentially filing false reports." She didn't mince words. "If you choose to press charges, you've got a rock-solid case. Any prosecutor would be thrilled to take this to trial." Encouraged by Sarah's support, we began digging even deeper into the county land records, and that's when we uncovered something truly unexpected. According to the official cadastral maps filed with the county. What Sarah and I uncovered next was a game changer, something even I hadn't expected. Buried deep in the county's cadastral records and original land grant files was detail long overlooked. the land beneath Karen's so-called subdivision was still legally part of my family's ranch, according to original land patents from the late 1800s. Turns out, Sunrise Development hadn't bought the land outright. They'd only secured a 99-year development lease. That meant they had the right to build houses and sell them, sure, but not the right to transfer land ownership, which meant, under Texas law, I was still the legal owner of every single square foot of the ground beneath Karen's precious community, every mailbox, every garden gnome, every inch of sidewalk she strutted down with her clipboard. Technically still my property. Suddenly, it wasn't just that Karen didn't have authority over me. She was the one trespassing every time she stepped out of her house. On day 16, things took a wild turn. Karen filed a formal report with the sheriff's office accusing me of trespassing on what she claimed was community property. And because she wanted to rally public support, she live-streamed the whole thing on social media. I watched the video later, jaw clenched. In it, Karen stood on her front lawn, crocodile tears rolling down her cheeks. I'm being harassed by a man who thinks he's above the law, she sniffled into the camera. He's scaring families, putting children in danger. It didn't take long for the video to go viral. Over 500 shares in the first 2 hours. The comment section lit up with support for her. Complete strangers calling me a menace, a bully, even a redneck terrorist. The crowd fell into stunned silence, and then, like the scene was written for a movie, the doors creaked open. A young sheriff's deputy walked in, his badge catching the light. Apologies for being late, he said with a half smile. Heard there was a situation about a land dispute? Karen jumped like she'd just seen an angel. Sheriff Thompson, thank goodness you're here. That's him, she said, dramatically pointing at me like she'd rehearsed it. That man has been trespassing and threatening me. The young deputy's eyes shifted from her, to me, and back. Then his smile widened ever so slightly. Ma'am, are you absolutely sure about that? He asked. Karen blinked. Of course I'm sure. Because the man you're pointing at, he paused, is my father. The room went dead silent. Karen froze, mouth slightly open, color draining from her face. She looked around, suddenly realizing she wasn't the hero of this story anymore. Mike, Sheriff Mike Thompson, walked over to me with a respectful nod. I've reviewed everything, Dad. All of it. And as for you, Mrs. Mitchell. He pulled out a printed statute from his folder. Under Texas Penal Code, Section 28.03, knowingly damaging someone else's property is a Class A misdemeanor. And based on the footage we just watched, you've done that a dozen times. Karen's voice trembled as she tried to salvage the moment. But he's violating HOA policies. He's undermining everything we've built. Mike shook his head. Ma'am, as was demonstrated tonight, your so-called HOA is legally void. No state registration. No majority consent. No authority. He stepped forward, and filing false police reports, that's a felony in this state. Karen finally seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. Her lips moved, but no words came. That commanding presence she had earlier. Gone. She looked like someone standing in the middle of a house fire holding a glass of water. From the back of the room, Tom Mitchell, her husband, stood up, face red with shame. Karen, we need to go. Now. But she wasn't done. No, I built this. I protected this community. She spun to face the crowd, but no one clapped. No one nodded. Just 40 pairs of eyes looking at her like she was a stranger. Finally, a gentle voice broke the silence. Mrs. Rodriguez from the third row slowly stood up. Jake, we're sorry, she said softly. We didn't know. Karen made it sound like you were dangerous, like you were hurting our neighborhood. A man near the front added, Honestly, none of us ever wanted an HOA. We moved out here to get away from rules, not get new ones. Then another neighbor chimed in, and another. One by one, Karen's supposed supporters admitted how they had been pressured, tricked, or flat out lied to. Karen hadn't been a protector, she'd been a dictator with a clipboard and a grudge. The meeting ended with a standing ovation, not for Karen, but for me. She sat slumped in her chair, her once perfect posture drooping, her emerald dress suddenly garish and out of place beneath the harsh lights of reality. But the fallout didn't end there. In the days that followed, footage from the meeting spread across town and online. People shared it as a warning. What happens when someone tries to grab power where none exists? Within a single week, Karen Mitchell's carefully crafted world collapsed. She was ordered to pay me $1,200 for damage and vandalism. The sheriff's department officially cited her for multiple property violations. Even her legal counsel dropped her case, issuing a refund and citing misrepresentation of facts. But the most shocking blow came 2 weeks later, when Tom Mitchell filed for divorce. The petition cited irreconcilable differences and public humiliation. Rumor had it Tom had been silently enduring Karen's dominance for years, and the HOA scandal was his breaking point. Karen had to sell the house, and within 2 months she'd packed up and moved back in with her mother in Oklahoma. She couldn't face the community she once ruled like a queen without a crown. Even after Karen Mitchell vanished from our community, the echoes of her downfall lingered. Her name had become internet shorthand for power gone wrong, and not just locally. She lost her remote marketing job weeks later. The company let her go after worrying her viral notoriety would tarnish their brand. But here's the strange twist. Her meltdown sparked something incredibly good. Without Karen's fake HOA breathing down everyone's necks, the neighborhood began to heal. Instead of fear-based fines and surveillance, people came together to form what they proudly called the Neighborhood Friendship Association, completely optional, totally supportive, and built on kindness rather than control. Mrs. Rodriguez, the sweet woman who'd publicly apologized to me during the meeting, became its heart and soul. "We don't need rules," she said over a shared plate of homemade tamales. "We need relationships." The group held monthly potlucks, helped each other with home repairs, even started a volunteer ride system for elderly neighbors needing doctor visits or groceries. Ironically, after ditching Karen's rigid rules, property values jumped 8% within 6 months. One realtor summed it up perfectly. Buyers would rather pay for peace of mind than put up with power trips and HOA drama. I never intended to become the neighborhood's go-to guy, but I found myself stepping into that role. Years in law enforcement had taught me how to resolve disputes without courtroom theatrics. When the Patels had issues with Dave's woodworking noise, I didn't call in a lawyer. I just helped them set a schedule around their baby's nap time. Problem solved. No paperwork, no threats, no stress. Even my bond with Mike, my son, grew deeper through it all. On a quiet fishing trip not long after, he looked at me and said, "Dad, you could have destroyed her, but you didn't. That's what makes you someone I look up to." It hit me harder than I expected. We talked about more than police work that day. We talked about service, leadership, and what it means to carry authority without becoming a tyrant. He told me he might run for county commissioner someday, and in that moment, I knew the values I live by were alive in him too. Last month, I built a new ranch gate, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. A beautiful archway of rich Texas cedar, carved with brass letters, Thompson Family Ranch, established. 2019, all neighbors welcome. The day we raised it, the entire neighborhood showed up. Mrs. Rodriguez brought tamales. The Patels served their famous chicken curry. Dave rolled in a cooler packed with beer and soda. Mike cut the ribbon himself. As we stood there smiling, I realized something strange, but true. Karen had brought us together, not by her leadership, but by her collapse. Dad, Mike said, admiring the gate. This isn't just an entrance. It's a symbol of standing up for what's right. That night, sitting on my porch with a warm coffee in hand, I looked out at that gate, glowing soft under the setting sun, and thought about all we'd been through. Karen came here thinking she could bully an old rancher into silence. She had no idea that experience always beats arrogance, that true communities are built on trust, not threats, that laws, when honored, don't divide people, they protect them. My old Ford F-150 still sits in the same spot, polished and spotless, right where the whole mess began. And every morning I look at it and smile. I remember that viral live stream where Karen called me a dangerous man. She was right in a way. I am dangerous, but only to people who think power gives them the right to trample others. Last week, I got an email from Tom Mitchell. Jake, thank you for helping me see through everything. I'm dating someone wonderful now, a school teacher. We're building something healthy, honest, and peaceful. Something Karen could never give. She's back in Oklahoma trying to start another HOA. Some folks never learn.